Welcome back to Gaslighting the Warfighter podcast, the Grunt Style Foundation's podcast that looks at the issues facing the veteran community that not everybody always wants to look at. So here we are today with my co-host Tim Jensen, co-owner of Grunt Style LLC and the board chairman of the Grunt Style Foundation. Also with us today is Cole Lyle, Director of Veterans Affairs and Rehabilitation of the American Legion. He's a United States Marine Corps veteran. We have Naomi Mathis, Deputy Director of the DAV's National Legislative Service, also an Air Force veteran like myself. Thank you for joining us, Naomi. And also with us today is Patrick Murray, another Marine Corps veteran. He is the National Legislative Director of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Thank you all for joining us today. So Tim, we're going to go ahead and start this conversation off because here today we have some of the most influential, largest national veterans organizations in America, and we're talking about this issue of the Veterans Annual Suicide Report. And we're also looking through the lens through which several national veterans organizations have resolutions on the books that call for a series of actions ranging from signatory informed consent, reform deprescribing guidelines, and even just basic data dumps from the VA on what's going on with prescription rates, suicides, toxicology reports, and others. So I'm going to start this conversation off with Naomi. You and I kind of bonded and kind of clicked when we started talking about our own personal experiences, and you've been very open and forthright with what you've experienced in your life and your career. We kind of like to start the conversation with you, share kind of your personal experience and look at this issue, and then kind of go from there, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. First, thank you for having me. A little bit about me. I as you stated, I am an Air Force veteran. I was in Iraq in 2003, and won't go through the whole history, but subsequently was diagnosed with PTSD due to combat. And so once I was diagnosed, of course, I was going through therapy, but had, tons of medication thrown at me, including antipsychotics, to the point where I was almost really catatonic. And was unable to take care of my children. And I was a single parent. I also had other things going on with me. I just had a child, so I had some hormone issues. And possibly, we believe now, it could have been some postpartum depression, as well as dealing with my symptoms of PTSD. Again, was thrown all these different medications and put on different cocktails and all of the things. And still to this day, I do also still take a cocktail of medications, but significantly less than what I had previously been on. And I kind of had to be my own advocate and do my own research on a lot of this. As we were talking yesterday, I happened to be at the pharmacy at VA. It kind of just happened that way. And, you and I got into a really good discussion about really understanding the medications that you're being prescribed and really having, knowing what comes out of that, what comes after that, what to expect.
You and I both had similar experiences in this regard, and it's hard talking about, but I think what you just kind of said, where you talked about you had to become your own advocate. How do you feel that's a challenge when here you are, the National Deputy Legislative Director of the DAV, unarguably one of the largest, most influential veterans organizations in America, and you're helping to lead the national legislative efforts for that organization. What does that say to the veterans out there that are going through similar experiences?
In our resolution, we call for really the veteran to be informed in the non-pharmaceutical alternative treatments, that the options that could be available to treat like chronic illnesses and pain and so forth. It's a lot of information, first of all, for that's coming at the veteran at once, or it's coming at the patient at once. It's medication that potentially they're about to be on. They don't really understand, like I said, the implications of all of that. They don't even understand the diagnosis that they had at the time that I really was diagnosed. I didn't understand what PTSD was. I didn't know that that was a thing, and I definitely didn't know that other people were feeling the exact same things I was, or going through the same experiences that I was going through. It's a lot to really understand. It's a lot on the family. And I really, yes, my body and, is mine. Nobody knows it really better than me. However, the practitioners, also kind of are the experts, right? That's why we go to them. That's why we go to the doctors. And so I think it just would really help if maybe some more information went along with what we're being given. And I think our membership also feels that way. I don't think, and they have said so in the form of this resolution, which is that the healthcare practitioners do provide clear and concise information on the conditions, on their diagnoses, as well as on the medications.
Informed signatory consent is a very, very important subject for us at the Grunstyle Foundation, for you guys, for all of the veteran service organizations that are joining us for this conversation. It is legislative action of some sort among the topics that these members are sharing with their leadership as what is important for us. I think as we are looking at some of the information that that's coming to the surface now, when specifically around suicides, around these mental health medicines, we are learning that nearly 70% of the community is being administered these medicines. And there is a significant increase within the female community of these medicines and their administration. But the VA report is showing us a decrease this year in suicides by 24.1% of within the female demographic. Now, I don't know if there's a causation and correlation there that speaks to that, but there's nothing that really speaks to any of the data that you can really put your finger on and say, well, okay, we're seeing success here. I'd love to hear your opinion on, specifically the administration of these psychotropics for females and the increase that we've seen within the last 10 years. I think that's extraordinarily important.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it is extremely important when it comes to women. We have a whole reproductive life cycle that happens with us. And, if you have, as I stated, I was going through, I was already diagnosed PTSD. I was already going through those symptoms. And then I had a baby. We didn't know if I was postpartum. And looking back 20 years later, it looks like, yes, in fact, I was. But you're throwing all of these things you're throwing these medications at these symptoms. And some of them don't necessarily need medication. So in, these suicide numbers, I will say something that I also found quite interesting was that the number of women veterans that were taking hormone replacement therapy, it seemed like that number of suicides had gone down. So that was a little interesting to me as well. There are other factors when it comes to women that really should go into a decision on whether or not you give her her a medication, and because I went through menopause at 34 years old, and that's because of a hysterectomy that was needed while I was on active duty, and so. And actually, studies show that women veterans and active duty members do go through menopause at younger ages. If that's the case, and you have a woman that presents that is having all of these issues honestly, your general practitioner may not be able to pick up on some of those, which is why it is also so important for practitioners to have competency in treating veterans and treating military members. And so I think that that is something that is not really spoken about a whole lot, and that's the whole menopause issue. And we think of it as a geriatric issue, and that's not really necessarily true.
Cole, some of the things that we have learned inside of the report were some new terms and text and terminology in the previous episode on some of those things. And I would love to hear your perspective and understanding of what does evidence-based therapies, what is that? Like that's new lexicon that we're being introduced to. I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, Tim, thanks for the question. And obviously, thanks for hosting me and everybody on the call here. Evidence-based treatment and therapy is traditionally known as psychological and pharmacological approaches to mental health and suicide prevention. So think prolonged exposure, EDMR, think obviously, pills, SSRIs, benzodiazepines, things like that. So that is and has been the traditional approach, in my opinion, very reactionary. We're asking people to seek counseling, call the VCL, get prescribed medication for symptoms of issues that already exist. We're not being very proactive. And I think one of the biggest takeaways, not only from this report, but from previous years' reports and the trend lines of the veteran suicide epidemic, is that our traditional approaches are not working. When you go to the VA's own website, for the PTSD analysis matrix on where you can submit like what issues you're having and kind of what are the best approaches, under their guidance for you, they say that pharmacology has a complete remission of symptoms of about 30% of the time. It doesn't obviously mention the negative side effects of some of that medication that we all are aware of. And then also that psychological approaches work roughly about 50% of the time. And they will make the argument that if you combine those two things, the success rate is higher. But objectively, number one, I don't think those data points by any measure would be defined as success. But if you look at the outcomes according to the data, and we could have a whole other conversation about the data, I don't think anybody could look at that and say, we have made headway with this issue and with this problem. So, a lot of the people that work at VA, all dedicated people that do want to address this problem, I think has spent years of their lives and hundreds of thousands of dollars going through medical school, doing, VA funded research, things like that, and have learned these evidence-based approaches to this problem, and are reticent to say that the approaches that they've used and have learned and have practiced throughout the years are failing and not working. And I think that's an institutional cultural shift that really needs to happen. And that's why, the VA is like a very large ship with a very small rudder. It takes a long time to change it in any one direction. And in a vertically integrated healthcare system, fully integrated healthcare system, you don't necessarily want changes to happen super quickly because people's lives and health hangs in the balance. But we do need more aggressive approaches from VA on this issue through alternative therapies, alternative treatments, more holistic things, partnerships with local organizations.
And that was the question I was going to get to next. Is that leads me to believe that the VA is getting prepared for alternative-based therapies if they're changing the way that they're identifying this really. Are they preparing for that? And does that really open up a whole different conversation that to your point and what we're all arguing, like ringing the bell on is like the methods today are not working. Is is the alternative modalities something that's on the future? Is that on the horizon?
Yeah, I think in instances where the VA has embraced certain alternative methods of treatment for mental health and suicide prevention, I got into veteran advocacy because I had my own issues with post-traumatic stress. I was on a cocktail of medications that I believe ultimately the side effects led me to almost become a statistic one night. I stopped taking the pills and ultimately ended up getting a service dog. When I moved up to Washington, D.C., through a series of events, I decided that, I wanted that option to be accessible to other veterans in larger quantities, and eventually lobbied kind of on my own, not on behalf of any organization, for a bill to try to expand access to service dogs for post-traumatic stress, TBI, and the VA institutionally. They fall back on there's not enough research and there's not enough evidence to prove that this is a viable option, viable solution. So when VA ultimately the bill passed and it was a pilot program, and in some instances where you see these changes, it's because there is a small group of dedicated people who believe in that particular option, really shoe leather lobbying on Capitol Hill to try to get the VA to force them to accept that change. Because typically what you see whenever they want to kind of slow roll this is, okay, there's not enough research, there's not enough evidence to prove that this works. Okay, well, fine, then go research it, right? But you have to go through the whole rigmarole of the legislative process and then the regulatory implementation process to make sure that they're doing what Congress intended to do in the law that was passed. And I think on some things, the Overton window, we're starting to see psychedelics be a more accepted modality. I still don't think we're quite there yet, but as more veterans have been elected to positions and been appointed and seated on the House Veterans Affairs Committee and the MILCON VA appropriation subcommittees, I think you see people who have lived this problem that now are allies to the VSO community and can really, really make the case. So I think we're starting to see that change.
Cole, we talked about kind of the report. We talked about alternative therapies. One thing we didn't see in the report was anything about service animals. We also talked about not seeing some issues related to medications, prescribing. This year's report, for the first time ever, the VA actually talked about benzodiazepines for its first time, but it was for the use of sedative use disorder, and talking about a 29% increase in veterans with sedative use disorder. They don't talk about the VA's actively been trying to get folks off of benzodiazepines for the past 15 years or so. And as they're doing that, you're seeing folks really struggling, because it's not an addiction necessarily, it's more of dependence. You get trapped on some of these medications. So could you talk about kind of what you saw in the report or what you didn't see?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what I don't see in the report is an acknowledgement of a couple of different things. One, that the data itself is incomplete, and I don't think we have a full idea of the scope and scale of this problem, because the data is collected through the CDC, which in turn gets their data from states, which in turn get their data from local and county municipalities. And there's often not a ability for local and county coroners to be able to verify somebody's service. A lot of times people that have liver failure because they are self-medicating or die by drug overdose, right, are not necessarily counted as suicides. So I think that's the biggest gap in understanding this problem is a lack of real quality data. But I think also when you look at things like I think they said that the highest rate of suicide for transitioning service members was in the Marine Corps at 67, almost 68 per 100,000, right? I think Navy was next up. They have that data, but they don't necessarily talk about what that data may imply and why transition from the organizations that have a super close kind of ethos and identity, right? How it is harder for those people transitioning to find a new identity, right? We talk a lot in this report about the raw data itself, and we talk a lot about lethal means. We talk a lot about different demographics, but there's really a lack of critical analysis of what some of the upstream factors are that contribute to people making this choice and getting to that critical mass of despair. With regards to medication, obviously you alluded to benzodiazepines. They said there was almost a 30% increase in people using benzos that had killed themselves. And also you alluded to the fact that, when people are, I think we saw this in the opioid epidemic, right? When there's focus on reducing opioids, right, it leads to more issues with chronic pain, which is one of the main contributors to national suicide and veteran suicide, right? So when you focus on this stuff and you start taking these things away, you look at people that turn to self-medication to solve the same problem. So that's a tricky situation to try to address. What caught my eye, the biggest thing when I was briefed, a lot of us were briefed, was the analysis of people that use VA care and people that use community care. The VA has said repeatedly in the past that people that use VA are less likely to kill themselves, right, than people who aren't. This was the first year that they admitted that people that use VA and use community care actually have a higher rate of suicide than people that don't, per the data in the hundreds of thousands. So that was shocking to me that they admitted that openly. And when asked about it, they said, well, people that engage with VA and community care obviously have other issues that they are dealing with that make suicide prevention more complicated, which on its face, I think makes sense. However, that is a large assumption that people that don't use VA don't also have issues that they deal with as a part of their everyday life. So there's a lot in this report that is not included, and some of the things that are included just lead to more questions.
That's interesting. So in 2019, I co-published an article or report kind of detailing what's going on with veteran suicides. And I showed there's a 32% higher suicide rate for those who use the VHA for their healthcare than veterans who don't. And now we're seeing higher suicide rates for vets who use community care versus VHA care. And then again, lowest suicide rates is down to the folks who are not using VA care at all in any way, shape, or form. I got the same answer when we were first talking about this because they said the same thing, and I'm going to paraphrase: veterans who use the VA are a higher needs population, but crazier, drunker, sicker is kind of what the message was. And the reality is that it may just be that we have better access to care. And actually, I would argue the VA over the past several years has been making changes in policies internally that make prescribing safer. And as we're putting folks out into community care, we may be seeing those higher suicide rates because those external doctors who the veteran now has better access to care through doesn't have those same protocols. But I'm going to pivot over to Pat, because as you were talking, Cole, you mentioned the 68 per 100,000 suicide rate for Marine Corps veterans who were recently transitioned. I'm not sure this is widely known, but there's a study that was done by a joint VA researcher out of Columbia University that showed that there's a 37 to 43% prescription rate for service members in their last year prior to discharge. The VFW, American Legion, DAV, pretty much all the major national veterans organizations all have resolutions on the books now calling for signatory informed consent because we know that patients aren't being told the risks. Pat, would you mind talking about kind of what you see as concerns in the report and how the VFW's resolutions might help make an impact in driving the change that we need to see within our community?
Sure. So, our resolutions mostly about information. Both Cole and Naomi touched on that. I feel one of VA's strongest ability is to be a repository of every bit of data we can possibly imagine, right? They have as much data, right? Cole mentioned some of the difficulties of getting some of that from the local folks, but ultimately, we got to do better at that, but ultimately get it up to VA so they can be the one that's pushing out all this information so we're better informed about this. There's been exponential increases in spending on suicide prevention, but it hasn't moved the needle. So we're spending it in the wrong places. What we want to learn about is like where we need to focus those efforts. In the report, there were, I think it was, let me just do the quick math here. It was 20 some pages of veterans and VHA related data, right? Some of the community care stuff, some of the recent encounters. There's 2 pages of data about the benefits. What we're really trying to do with not just our resolutions, but our focus is try to make this kind of we talk about a holistic approach. It's not just the last time you sat, on a mental health professional's couch and talked to them or got a pill. There's so much more to this. What we've learned is that, veterans who have a roof over their head, they're gainfully employed, they have food on their table, they have money in their wallet, are less likely to die by suicide. And that's where VBA comes in. All those great benefits like, the GI Bill, the home loan, disability compensation, things that help you economically. So that's what we really want to focus on and not just make this a mental health conversation. It's a key component of it, but it is just a component of it. So that's what we're really trying to do. We've been pushing for more information. There was a very small table in there that had, I think, 4 categories, statistics. We want to see more of that. We want to know is, for example, the VR&E program, a buffer against some of these negative outcomes. We want to know, does the GI Bill really launch people forward for success? I mean, some of it we know for other purposes, but does it also have an ancillary protective factor against whether it's suicide, homelessness, unemployment, things like that? So, our focus is this small piece of the pie. Learning more about VBA data is not going to end, this whole problem, but it'll help us maybe focus. It'll help us know where we need to spend that money. Congress and previous administrations have shown they're willing to spend, but we got to spend it smartly. We do live in a world of finite resources, so let's stop throwing money at things that just aren't really moving a needle. That's what we're really trying to focus on. Our resolutions focus on informed consent, right? Black box, issues, things like that. We want to make sure that we also have information about that as well. Which particular, pharmaceutical things are, possibly leading to some of these negative outcomes. We just want more information. I don't know if anybody ever says, more information is a bad thing, but when VA just kind of reverts back to, it's a mental health thing, it puts all that other stuff aside. And we want to kind of knock that out so that we don't continue going down that same path, doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results.
The amount of money that's gone towards this over the past decade is about $10 billion. Fact check me, guys. It's either $1 billion or it's $10 billion. I think it's $10 billion.
So it depends on how you talk about the amount of money that goes to suicide prevention, right? Because structurally, the VA, the Office of Suicide Prevention is housed in the VHA in the Office of Mental Health, right? So institutionally, they look at this problem as a mental health problem, which is why evidence-based therapy is their traditional modalities to solve the problem, right? Less than 50% of veterans are enrolled in VHA healthcare, maybe right around 50%. Even less use the VA on a recurring basis, right? And there are probably a bunch of different reasons veterans don't use VA. They may have private health insurance, TRICARE, any different distrust of the VA may be a factor. But like, what are you doing if you want to be holistic about your approach to this, you have to have effective outreach to veterans, right? And the VA's budget for suicide prevention outreach specifically is roughly, I think, $570 million per year, which is less than 1/10 of 1% of their entire budget. And most of that outreach goes to the Veteran Crisis Line. Some of it goes to a program called under the Commander John Scott Hannon Act. There was a Staff Sergeant Parker Gordon Fox grant program that provides up to $750,000 a year for local organizations doing suicide prevention, which I think is a good approach because you have local organizations on the ground that are not, veterans won't necessarily directly associate them with VA, but they're doing the work. They have the trust of local veterans, which is also in line with the VA over the years, getting closer and closer to the community outside of medical centers, CBOCs, vet centers, that sort of stuff. I've never met a veteran that said, "Oh, I saw a Choose VA advertisement at a hockey game," or something like that, and that's what made me decide to go use VA or call the Veteran Crisis Line or something like that. I think to Pat's point, a more targeted approach to effectively reach veterans where they live is crucial in an environment where less than half even use the VA itself, are engaged and enrolled in VA healthcare. So that's a huge thing. When we talk about budget, oftentimes when you say, "Hey, how much have we allocated for suicide prevention?" the VA will point to the $13 billion budget for mental health, and you're like, "Okay, but that's not necessarily all suicide prevention." Like we all know here, it's pretty intuitive that when somebody gets to that point, it's usually a conglomeration of financial issues, relationship issues, identity issues. Mental health certainly can play a factor and make somebody more susceptible to going down that path, but it is very rarely I've seen just, "Oh my gosh, I'm having horrible flashbacks or anxiety attacks or things like that," and that's why you decide to go down that path. So again, institutionally, we need to be more proactive, less reactive, and the money needs to reflect that.
Veterans who use the VBA benefits alone have lower suicide rates than veterans who use the VBA and the VHA, and also has lower suicide rates than veterans who use just the VHA. Do you have any ideas, or kind of like looking at that issue through this lens, like what may be going on there?
So, one of the things that we do know that some of these programs can be incredibly uplifting. We've talked about in the past, a lot of folks have proclaimed that, the GI Bill built the middle class after, World War II. It offered, the tuition assistance. It offered the home loan. It is a small business grant. It was all kind of lumped in. It was a fantastic program when it was first kicked off in 1944. It largely helped veterans readjust, but it was a lot of economic, powerful tools that were part of it. We've continued on. We've grown and increased the GI Bill to what it is now today. The home loan is maybe one of the most economically important VA benefits that far too many veterans don't use. So anybody listening out there, if you're not using the VA home loan, please take a look at that. It's an incredible program. It can really set you up for success. Cole touched on it, right? He said that the mental health is one part of it that could exacerbate some of those other things that are weighing someone down, whether it's a relationship, whether it's economic issues, financial issues, things like that. We got to focus on that because their numbers, even as flawed, as the VA suicide report does show that there's maybe something that we can focus on, and it's VBA benefits. I can't necessarily say why VBA only seems to be a lower statistical number. VHA only is higher, but VBA and VHA seem that they should not be those numbers don't completely jive, but it does show that maybe there's something that we can begin to chip away at this if we can focus on some of those other stressors that go on with a veteran who is struggling.
One of the questions I'd love for our listeners to start wrestling to the ground is like, how do we make change? What are the instruments? What are the solutions that are at our disposal that we can start soliciting the people that have the ability to make this change and put them in the position that they, oh yes, this makes sense, right? Well, that comes largely down at the opportunities of what you guys do in terms of of your ability to legislate and lobby at the federal level. Where do you see the opportunity, between your organizations and the relationships you've created, on the Hill, as opportunities to, get through the Senate and the House, some motivation to say, hey guys, like I think we're focusing on the wrong things here from the VA, from the suicide report. Let's start there. Here's what we would like to see and organize around that. Are those conversations happening, or is that out of the realm of possibility?
So one of the things that we are trying to focus on is that period of time right after service, right? That the VFW and DAV run what's called the BDD program, Benefits Delivery at Discharge. It's in the TAP class before people even take off the uniform to make sure they're enrolled in some of these benefits and healthcare within VA. We believe that's a place where we can make incremental gains to make sure that people are set up so that they have a safety net immediately post-service. That's something that we are focusing on. We're trying to expand that. In the past year, VA has agreed to allow those service officers actually to participate in the TAP briefings, so that people can actually enroll, not just learn about the information, but actually begin to enroll on the spot. So ideally, they would, drive out the gate that last time and have their health care and their benefits ready to go. So those are places where, through our efforts at VA, we've gotten that accessibility. We're also working with members of Congress to codify that, to make sure that, nothing is going to prevent veterans from service members, from being able to access those benefits. So that's something that, again, that's our small way of trying to make sure that while those service members, we still have one hand on the steering wheel, we can hopefully guide them towards something that's going to set them up the next year, 10 years from now, whatever it might be. Once you get out, me, for example, it is hard. It really is, especially if you're not tied to, whether it's the VFW, the American Legion, or DAV. It is more difficult. So that's our way of trying to get this as upstream as possible so that, when you're still in service, these things are looking more attractive to you and easier to actually navigate.
Naomi, go back to you. Following on Tim's question, he kind of asked, what can we do, or what can our organizations do that can make an impact on this now? So suggest this idea of a red alert system inside of the VA when someone's running low on their medications. What would that look like from a advocacy perspective? Would that need to be policy changed internally at the VA, or would that be legislated? And do you see a path forward on something like that?
Well, let me say this, not everything needs to be legislated. And, a lot of times we hear that, we'll just put this in a bill. Well, no, that's not always the answer. There are ways that VA can go about doing this, whether it be through technology, they can flag a veteran's record or whatever it is. Not everything needs to be legislated. I'll say, it is it's difficult because when you get down to that point where you look at your meds for the week, because, you have so many, you have to actually prepare them for the week. When you look at them and you realize, I'm only down to one, or I don't know if I can make it through the week, and wait for it to be mailed to me. Because if you just stop that medication, you will go through withdrawal. And the implications of that alone, not just psychologically, but physically, you can stroke out. I mean, there's so many different things depending on the medication that you're taking, but there's so many different things that can happen. And I think that the idea of flagging someone's record to say, this veteran's medication is getting low, or I still don't understand why there isn't some sort of a way for them to automatically just refill it. And I understand that maybe it might be certain medications, but I've been on this particular medication for at least the last 15 years, let's just say. And it just is this rigmarole every single time. So now, you've prescribed me something, I've become dependent on it. Now I have to, kind of tailor my life and, around this particular medication, to make sure that I don't run out, because if I do, I could die, or, it's just all of these different things. So I think potentially doing that, maybe like you said, some sort of a red alert or a flag, or, alert that um, pharmacist, that the veterans running out of their medication. Send a message to the provider. Does this medication need to be renewed?
And I think the VA can do all of those things, Naomi, right? And I'd love to hear you guys, because I want to point out something very clear for everybody that's listening and I'm watching this, is that, we all got to watch the VA do one of the most monumental things it's ever done in its entire existence. And we got to observe it with our own eyes just over the last 2 years. And what they did to get the PACT Act threaded through the organization and into every veteran's home in America was brilliantly done. It was a big marketing plan. They moved the behemoth of this organization in ways that it has never been done before. So if they wanted to truly solve this problem, I point to the marketing budget that we just talked about earlier in this conversation. If they truly wanted to do something about this, they would. But they don't, right? Because the dirty secret is the House controls the spending of the dollar, right? But the VA can spend the dollar how they choose, and they're just choosing not to. And that I think is fundamentally wrong. And that's where I think that we have, as organizations, the best opportunity now, coming in with the new organization of Doug Collins and administration, to really lean as these organizations and be like, listen, guys, we've seen this over and over again. It's over. Let's change the way that we're doing business. Let's change the way that we're reporting out on these things, and let's do what you guys did for the PACT Act, and let's solve suicide within the ranks of the veteran that comes to the VHA for their very care that you guys market for. And I'd love to hear what you guys think, how we can do this when we get to the new administration and the VA that is coming forward. How start with Cole. I'd love to hear you guys what you guys are lining up for.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and something a lot of organizations are thinking about is how to work with the new administration, with the people that have been nominated yet to be confirmed, right? A lot of people don't realize that the VA, aside from being the largest healthcare system in the country and probably the world, is also the second largest federal agency in budget and personnel behind the Department of Defense, right? So it's a huge organization that, unlike the Department of Defense, is very decentralized, and the demographic of people that they deal with is much older, have a lot more health issues. There are challenges to delivery for different geographic locations, all sorts of things, right? And even that said, the VA has, I think, the smallest number of political appointees of every government agency in the federal government. So even with change of administration, there's not as much political, I hesitate to use the word power, but power and pressure to be able to implement broad sweeping changes. Now, that being said, the VA does have a lot of authority from central office to, and the White House obviously has a lot of authority through executive orders and agency directives, regulatory changes, that sort of stuff to be able to change things. As it relates to suicide prevention, I think that there are some pretty basic things that could be done. Again, we talked about the culture issue, the VA looking at suicide prevention through the lens of mental health. I think a great step for prioritization and messaging. The VA says suicide prevention is their number one clinical priority. I think it should be their number one overall priority. And I think taking the Office of Suicide Prevention out of the Office of Mental Health, potentially even VHA, making it a direct report to the Secretary, would kind of help unify the effort between VBA and VHA to tackle this problem, number one. I think obviously working the new administration, working with Congress to talk about the budgetary challenges and issues in the macro political sense right now. It's a brave new world as we're looking at, I think a lot of fuss has been made about, Doge and budgetary restraints and different reconciliation bills and the way forward on budget for different things. But there definitely will be opportunities to discuss these complex issues with the new administration. Some of it is going to boil down to an individual's history and personal exposure to these issues to understand why it is as important as it is. I think we can lean on members of Congress that have a military background to help message that more effectively. But there's a lot of opportunity for sure.
Pat or Naomi, should the Government Accountability Office be conducting these reports? Pull this outside of the VA and have someone else do it so it's not the VA themselves writing the report on themselves?
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad thought or suggestion at all. This is primarily driven by VHA, and they're going to focus on VHA related things and not think about what else may be a part of this. What I don't love about all of these reports is, they project different numbers out there and leave it up to us to, figure out what the next step should be. First off, VA has so much more information. It's a very frustrating thing that to get them to even include other parts of some of this data. For years, we were just told, yes, they have the data. We just need to ask for it. That's not right? Pat Murray should not have to ask for some of this data and store it on my desktop, right? That's not a proper way to go about this. This is our government, right? All this information should be as readily available as possible. There's nothing top secret about whether it's VHA or VBA participation and usage. What I don't love is there's never nearly enough recommendations for things that I don't ever want to call them successes, because nothing about this is a success, but maybe places where there are being incremental gains being made. It doesn't seem like they ever want to step out and, on their own focus on these things. They're presenting the information and saying, here, you do with it as you will. That's never something that I think is very helpful. It would be fantastic if in this report and all of their actions, they also said we need to do X, Y, or Z more. There are certain things that they have over the years talked about, places where they are seeing positive interactions, such as like the Solid Start program, but there's not enough of that. It would be so much more helpful if there was a lot more information and also some analysis about what we can do with that and what VA can on their own pivot towards, but also say, we need Congress to do this, or we need the administration to do this, or we need veterans organizations like our three organizations. What can we do? The onus is not on us, but we could be a force multiplier everywhere we can. Between DAV, American Legion, VFW, we are in every town and community in this country and even across the world, right? Overseas as well. So that's places that, we want to help. And it seems like we're banging on the door asking, and we're given a report with some stats for Pat Murray or Cole Lyle to figure out on our own and take to Congress and try to make change. Some more, initiative from VA would be, I think, more beneficial.
And I think you're absolutely correct, Pat, is, when 70% of it's 68%, but that number of individuals within the care of the organization are, on a psychotropic medicine of some sort, there has to be more information than just that number alone. Like, that's ridiculous for anybody to sit back and be like, oh, That's great. Thanks for sharing that number without having 10 different follow-on questions.
Well,
right?
Tim, just to interrupt, they didn't put that number out there.
Oh,
Remember,
very,
we
very
put
good.
that statistic together along with the 28% prescription rate. And like only a handful of folks actually had their hand on that data. The VA had it, but we're the ones that put that out. So just wanted to point that out.
Well, you're absolutely right. And that's the leading of this all is that private institutions and private organizations like the VFW, the VA, the DAV are doing all this work for the VA, to Pat's point, because they're just giving us these breadcrumbs that we're supposed to be like, oh, I can make sense of these bones, and I'm going to go in this direction. Well, that's just absurd.
Well, I'll say this too. You talked about it earlier, where women veterans, the number went down by 24.1%, whereas the year before it went up by 24.1%. And, we went back and we were trying to get an answer like, well, why is that? That seems kind of odd. And kind of convenient, but kind of odd. The way it kind of was explained to us was, it could be, it's because of the small sample of women veterans and this and that. Well, you're putting this number out there and leaving it to us. And so, while we hope that's the case, we hope women veterans suicide rate has gone down. I'll say this. From the beginning of them tracking the suicide rate till today, it's actually gone up. If you look at the rate from when they started to track suicide to today, it's actually continuously gone up. Forget about the swings and everything and the ups and downs in between. You got to look at from beginning until today. And so we did a journal review. Womenveterans.org is DAV did a review, and that's our Women Veterans report. It's called Women Veterans: The Journey to Mental Wellness. And in there, we talk about exactly that, which is there are so many of these gains and, in between, these gains, so to speak, but when really you look at the sum of it all, that's really not the case. And unfortunately, that rate translates to a life lost.
It's insulting, really. It's like an insult of our intelligence, and Well,
I think I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think our organizations just continue to do what we're doing, continue to stay boots on the ground, continue to beat the drum and do exactly this, continue to have conversations. And, there is a question, am I my brother's keeper?
Absolutely.
Yes. Right?
I appreciate you pointing that out, Naomi, because I don't know if Tim mentioned it earlier, but I went to our good old Chat GPT and asked what are the probability of a 24.1% increase over 1 year and then a 24.1% decrease the very next year. It's like 1 in 15 billion or so. I'm rounding down by about 900 million. So I guess what would you say for next steps as we go forward? Say if there were to be a message to Doug Collins as he assumes role hopefully after the successful confirmation on the 21st, what would the ask be from you as a veteran?
Yeah, I think two things. My biggest message here is there needs to be a reinvigorated sense of urgency for this problem. When you go and you talk about veteran suicide, in the United States, anywhere you go and you talk with veterans, this is one of the few issues that gets them just very viscerally angry because they've had to deal with this with friends and family members that they served with or that they know. And there seems to be, to them, a lack of urgency. Like they all say we should be throwing everything we can at this problem because it's a black stain, on our country that this isn't getting better and is in fact getting worse. So that would be my number one thing. And I think there's some, things that any incoming secretary could do to make changes and kind of reinvigorate that sense of urgency. But from a policy perspective, I think, again, I know right now there's a conversation more broadly happening about, VA dollars going to community providers and community organizations. But I think the Fox Grant program is a great program that is really designed to get to the upstream problems. I think the program itself needs a little bit of fine tuning to make sure that the organizations that the money is going to are the local people on the ground that are doing good work. But that's a very small percentage of the VA's budget, and I think it does a lot of good in terms of the outreach and then the actual work being done on the ground to assist this problem.
Thanks, Cole. Naomi?
So I think, as whoever the new secretary is going to be, I think they need to take a good look at exactly this. Make this the number one priority overall, as was mentioned, not just the number one clinical priority, but the number one priority, and really look at what is seen as gold standards. Look at these other, maybe healthcare systems. We have the largest healthcare system in the world, and that understandably so. But there are smaller other populations that can be looked at. That might help, such as looking at the rural communities, looking at underserved populations, looking at minority populations, and making sure that these areas are being reached in every aspect. As Pat mentioned, ensuring that there is housing security, that there is no food insecurity, and homelessness is real, and not just homelessness, but underhoused, and that could be a whole other topic that I could go into now. But really taking a look at what has been done, particularly in the last several years, and because the number of women veterans also is growing and continues to grow. And we are the fastest growing population. And so I think that, when I talk about the underserved population, I'm also speaking about that demographic and ensuring that women veterans have what they need, and find out what's going on with that 24.1% number, because that is such a head scratcher for me.
Thank you very much, Naomi.
Pat, one question I wanted to ask you, right, is the Grunstyle Foundation and the VFW have partnered this year on a lot of your legislative issues that speak to exactly this topic that we're talking about. So, we are really grateful to partner up on this and amplify this messaging. What say you? Where do you see your organization steering the conversation and working as this larger team to address these bigger issues?
Sure. So, what I'd really like to do, I guess, if Doug Collins is listening, hopefully a fan of the Gaslighting the Warfighter podcast, but if he's listening, stop listening to the system. If he understands it's a problem, right? He has to know this stuff, that this is an issue. Don't go ask the system, how's the system doing? Because the system's likely going to say the system's doing it right. We kind of want to break that. Be kind of a change agent. That's what I would urge him to do. And it doesn't necessarily need to be, listen to Pat Murray or the VFW or the American Legion or DAV, but you got to not rely on the system to tell you how's the system doing. That's maybe the biggest thing I would urge him to do. Think about some outside the box, maybe solutions, ideas. There's money to be used for this. The Staff Sergeant Fox grants were a great way to take that and pivot and try something else. Let's do more like that. That's what I would push for. I know that we've talked about a lot of things, Tim and Derek, with different grunt style things. One of the things we're really going to focus on is alternate therapies, right? So whether it's plant-based therapies, psychedelics, things like that, let's find out what works, because the traditional modalities, whether it's sitting knee to knee with someone and talking about them, or pharmacy solutions, right? That is what we've relied on for far too long as the solution for some of these things. Let's get innovative. Let's think about different ways that we can maybe get ahead of this, try something different. We've heard plenty of times over the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again, expecting different results. That's what the biggest thing I would push is, please, let's try anything different. What works for some of these folks, let's keep it going. But if it's not working for everybody, let's find ways to kind of plug those holes.
Thanks, Pat. Cole, thanks a lot for being here today. Do you have any parting comments for us as we depart?
I would say that, the American Legion has a national program called Be the One that seeks to destigmatize conversations around mental health and encourage peer-to-peer support. I would say to a veteran listening that is struggling with just everyday life things, like I said, relationship, financial stress, things like that, really lean on your people, your friends, family, veteran peer support. It's not hard to have a difficult conversation. You just have to have it. As the program alludes to, be the one that helps stop somebody from making that decision, and be the one to stay if that's you.
Thanks, Cole. Pat?
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Tim, and everybody else. The biggest thing, if anybody's listening, if you encounter a hurdle, right, whether it's with the VA, we've all heard stories, tons of folks, may go there and not get the desired outcome they're looking for. Please don't give up. Whether that's go back to them, try somewhere else, try somewhere in the community. There's a ton of great resources that are out there. Please don't just, put your head down, get discouraged, get demoralized. Please just keep pushing forward. If any of these things ever, you're ever encountering any of these feelings, please, you are not alone. That's the biggest message. Don't give up. You're not alone. Keep charging forward. And, hopefully, a year from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we won't ever have to have this conversation again, because, we've gotten ahead of this and hopefully get down to zero.
Thanks a lot, Pat. Naomi?
As someone that has dealt with suicidal ideations, I will also make that plea to someone. If you feel like your head is not above water, you feel like you're just not going to climb out of this hole that you're in, there is help. You have heard us talk about the crisis line 988. Press 1 for the veteran option. You've heard things here about VA. It's not all doom and gloom. I trust me when I tell you there is light at the other end. Trust me, please. And I really am, DAV is here for you, and turn to your fellow brothers and sisters if possible. If not, just please reach out to someone and just let them know, hey, I need help. And those are the hardest words, the hardest 3 words that you might ever have to utter, but it is important, and your very life could depend on it.
Thanks, Naomi.
All right, I want to thank Patrick, Naomi, Cole for your contributions to the show. We're certainly talking about some heavy subject matter, but what I want to thank you the most for are, for anybody that's watching, these are 3 individuals that raised their hand. They got into the fight. That is anybody listening. You can get into this conversation as well. You can go to any one of these organizations and get involved and be a member and be a force of change. That is what we are driving for here, is to get you off the sideline, get into the conversation, raise your hand, be counted, and get involved. That's all I want. That's all we all want, right, is to make a better outcome for our community, because we have worked very hard in previous lives, and we need to be able to set the table for the next generation that's going to raise their hand to defend this beautiful country that we served our time in doing so honorably and boldly. But it ain't gonna start until you take that first step and you get into the fight, because we need you, and we need you now more than ever, because we have a viable chance to make a significant change in the way that we address suicide, the way that we address mental health and over-prescribing or the use of psychotropic medicines within our community. And hopefully there are some substantial learnings that we can take from this that we can apply to the larger part of this country that needs this desperately as well. Until next time, we'll see you then.
This has been Gaslighting the Warfighter. The Grunstyle Foundation continues fighting for those who have served. Support our mission at grunstylefoundation.org/donate. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and keep moving forward with purpose.